An emperor lies dying, but this isn't some glorious end on the battlefield. No, he's slumped over at his own dinner table, gasping for air, choking on a mushroom. This is the story our ancient sources, the historians Tacitus and Suetonius, want us to believe. They paint a chilling picture, as the Emperor Claudius vomits. His wife, the Empress Agrippina, calmly calls for the doctor. But this doctor isn't there to help. He approaches the sputtering emperor with a feather, supposedly to help him clear his throat. Instead, the feather is slick with a faster, deadlier poison. It's a gesture of brutal, terrifying intimacy. This isn't just murder. This is the story of a woman who clawed her way to the absolute peak of Roman power, a woman who would allegedly stop at nothing to put her son on the most powerful throne in the world. This is the story of Agrippina the Younger. But before we get lost in the drama, a word of warning. History is written by the victors, and in this case, it was written by men who had every reason to paint Agrippina as a monster. Our job is to sift through the scandal and see if we can find the truth. To understand Agrippina, you have to understand the family she was born into, the Julio-Claudians, forged by the legendary Augustus. This dynasty was built on power, prestige, and a whole lot of blood. Agrippina was the great-granddaughter of Augustus himself, daughter of the hero General Germanicus, and sister to the infamous Emperor Caligula. Power wasn't just in her blood, it was her birthright. Born in 15 AD, she was a player in the deadly game of Roman succession, a game with no clear rules where losing almost always meant death. The Julio-Claudian dynasty was a paradox of immense power and terrifying instability. There was no simple firstborn son gets the throne system. Instead, power was passed through a messy web of adoptions, strategic marriages, and, when that failed, cold-blooded murder. It was a world where a nephew could kill an uncle, a brother could exile a sister, and a mother could see her son as the ultimate key to her own survival. Agrippina learned early that to be a woman in this world was to be a tool, a bargaining chip for making male heirs. But she refused to be just a pawn. She aimed to be the player moving the pieces, and her ultimate piece, her king in this imperial chess game, was her son. His name was Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, but we know him by a different name, Nero. Agrippina's life was driven by a single, all-consuming goal: see Nero on the throne. This wasn't just about motherly love, it was about securing her own place in a world designed to sideline her. She would mold him, guide him, and clear a path for him, even if that path had to be paved with the bodies of her enemies and her own family. Her story is a masterclass in political maneuvering, a family drama so bloody and full of intrigue it makes fiction look tame. Agrippina's education in Roman power politics started young, and it was brutal. She watched as her father, the beloved Germanicus, died under mysterious circumstances, very likely poisoned on the orders of the Emperor Tiberius. She saw her mother and two older brothers arrested and starved to death, all for the crime of being popular rivals to the throne. This was the family business, survival of the most ruthless. When her brother, Gaius, better known as Caligula, became emperor in 37 AD, it looked like her luck had changed. He showered her and her sisters with honors, putting their faces on coins. For a moment, Agrippina was at the center of Roman power. But Caligula's reign quickly spiraled into paranoia. Convinced his sisters were plotting against him, he stripped Agrippina of her wealth and exiled her to a barren island. Her son, Nero, was just a toddler, his inheritance seized. It was a crushing blow, but for Agrippina, it was a lesson. Never again would she let her fate rest in a man's hands. Her salvation came in 41 AD, delivered by the daggers of the Praetorian Guard who assassinated Caligula. The throne was suddenly empty. In the chaos, the guards found a terrified man hiding behind a curtain, Agrippina's uncle, Claudius. They declared him emperor, maybe as a joke, But the title stuck. One of Claudius's first acts was to recall his nieces from exile. Agrippina was back in Rome. A widow and relatively poor, but she was back in the game. She needed to rebuild, and in Rome, that meant marriage. She married a wealthy and influential senator, Passienus Crispus. Conveniently for Agrippina, he died not long after they wed, leaving her his huge fortune. The ancient gossips, of course, whispered that his death was a little too convenient. Had she helped him along? There's no proof, but a pattern of rumors was beginning to emerge. With her new wealth, Agrippina aimed for the ultimate prize, the emperor himself. Claudius's third wife, the scandalous Messalina, made a fatal mistake by publicly marrying her lover while Claudius was away. Messalina was executed, leaving the position of empress vacant. This was Agrippina's chance. Now, Roman law forbade an uncle from marrying his niece, but for Agrippina, laws were just obstacles. She used her charm and her family connection to her father, Claudius's beloved brother, to get close to the aging emperor. She lobbied her allies in the Senate to change the law, arguing it was in the state's best interest. In 49 AD, they were married. Agrippina was Empress of Rome. She immediately began to consolidate her power. The ancient writers accuse her of systematically purging the palace of anyone loyal to the previous empress, using exile or execution to clear the board. She wasn't just the emperor's wife, she was becoming his co-ruler. She was granted the title of Augusta, an honor previously only given to Augustus's revered wife, Livia. Her face appeared on coins alongside Claudius, sometimes facing him as an equal. The historian Tacitus, who was no fan of ambitious women, wrote with disgust that Rome was under complete obedience to a woman. He meant it as an insult, but it proves how successful she was. Her ultimate goal, though, was always Nero. Her own power depended on her aging husband. Lasting power meant controlling the next emperor, and Claudius had his own son, a boy named Britannicus, who was the natural heir and a direct rival to Nero. Agrippina's campaign to elevate Nero was a work of art. First, she convinced Claudius to adopt him in 50 AD. Since Nero was older than Britannicus, he seemed like the more immediate choice. He was now Nero Claudius Caesar, his name a powerful symbol of imperial legitimacy. Next, she had Nero engaged to Claudius's daughter, Octavia. She installed men loyal to her as Nero's tutors, the philosopher Seneca, and the commander of the Praetorian Guard, Burrus. These men would owe their careers to her. Meanwhile, Britannicus was sidelined, his tutors dismissed or worse. But by 54 AD, a problem. The sources claim that Claudius, then 63, began to have second thoughts. He was heard muttering regrets about marrying Agrippina and adopting Nero, and started showing favor to his biological son, Britannicus. For Agrippina, this was a flashing red light. All her work could be undone. Claudius had to go, and he had to go before Britannicus came of age. And so we come back to the mushrooms. Did she really do it? The ancient historians Tacitus, Suetonius, and Cassius Dio all say yes. They tell the story of the poison specialist Locusta, the tainted mushroom served at dinner, and the doctor with the poisoned feather. It's a fantastic, horrifying story. But it's also entirely possible that Claudius, an old man in poor health, simply died of a stroke. The poison narrative came from writers who were deeply hostile to Agrippina and powerful women in general. We will never know for sure. What is certain is the result. On October 13, 54 AD, Emperor Claudius was dead. Agrippina acted with lightning speed. She kept his death a secret for hours, sealing the palace. All while making a public show of grief, she and her allies secured the loyalty of the Praetorian Guard. Only when everything was ready were the palace doors flung open and Nero, not Britannicus, was presented to the soldiers as their new emperor. He was just 16. Agrippina had one. She was now the mother of the most powerful man in the world. In the beginning, Agrippina's power was absolute. Nero was emperor, but everyone in Rome knew who was really calling the shots. The early years of his reign were the peak of her influence. Initially, the Senate agreed to hear her reports from behind a curtain, a small nod to tradition that still let her run things. But even that didn't last. In one famous incident, while Nero met with an Armenian embassy, Agrippina walked in fully intending to sit on the throne next to him. This would have been an unthinkable act of co-rule. It was only Seneca's quick thinking whispering to Nero to go down and greet his mother that turned a political crisis into a display of respect. Her image was minted on coins right alongside her son's, an unprecedented honor. She had done the impossible. She had climbed to the very top. But when you're at the top, the only way to go is down. And the son she had raised to be king would be the one to push her off the cliff. The relationship started to sour almost right away. Nero was a teenager who loved music, poetry, and chariot racing. At first, this was fine. He could play with his lyre while she ran the empire. But as he got older, her constant supervision began to feel suffocating. He was the emperor, but he felt like his mother's puppet. The first major crack was over a woman, a former slave named Act. Nero fell in love with her, a relationship Agrippina saw as a direct challenge to her control. She flew into a rage, reminding Nero of everything she'd done for him, the crimes she'd committed in his name. But it backfired. Her anger only pushed him further away and closer to his advisors, Seneca and Boris. The very men Agrippina had put in power now saw her as a problem and began working to sideline her. The real turning point came with the death of Britannicus in 55 AD. As Nero grew more distant, Agrippina made a fatal mistake. In a moment of fury, she threatened to march to the Praetorian camp with Britannicus and declare him the true emperor. It was probably an empty threat, but Nero took it very seriously. The thought that his mother could replace him with the son of the man she'd murdered for him was terrifying. According to the ancient sources, Nero decided Britannicus had to go. At a dinner party, a cup of wine was brought to the boy. It was harmless, but too hot. When cold water was added to cool it, that water was laced with a fast-acting poison. Britannicus took a sip, convulsed, and collapsed dead. As guests panicked, Nero calmly remarked that the boy was probably just having an epileptic fit. But Tacitus says Agrippina was frozen in terror. She knew exactly what had happened. This wasn't just the murder of her stepson, it was a message. Nero had used her own alleged weapon, poison, to eliminate a rival. He had done it without her. He was no longer her puppet. From that day on, her power vanished. Nero stripped her of her honors, removed her military bodyguard, and forced her out of the imperial palace. The arrival of a new woman, the beautiful and ambitious Poppaea Sabina, made things worse. Poppaea became Nero's mistress and relentlessly goaded him, mocking him as a mummy's boy who was afraid of his own mother. The Roman historians, never shy of a scandal, even claimed that Agrippina, in a desperate attempt to win back her son, tried to seduce him. It's likely vicious slander, but it paints a picture of a relationship that had become hopelessly toxic. Agrippina was now isolated and powerless, facing a paranoid son. She had taught Nero that power was a zero-sum game, and that rivals had to be eliminated. She was about to become the final victim of her own curriculum. She had created a monster, and it was turning on its creator. By 59 AD, Nero had decided his mother had to die. But killing the great-granddaughter of Augustus wasn't simple. It had to look like an accident. And so began a series of murder plots so theatrical and absurd they almost defy belief. First, the story goes, he tried poison 3 times. But Nero feared his mother was too clever, that she had protected herself with antidotes. Whether she actually did or this was just his paranoia, the attempts failed. Next, Nero supposedly had engineers rig the ceiling of her bedroom to collapse on her while she slept. It was a perfect plan, a tragic structural failure. But someone leaked the plot, and Agrippina, warned ahead of time, avoided her bed. Once again, she'd cheated death. Nero was now in a full-blown panic. His mother seemed invincible. He summoned his admiral, Anicetus, who came up with his masterpiece, a collapsible boat. The plan was diabolical. Nero pretended to reconcile with his mother, inviting her to a festival at the coastal resort of Baiae. He was warm and affectionate, and after a lavish banquet, he walked her to the shore. A beautiful, specially decorated boat was waiting to take her back to her villa. It was a death trap. Anicetus had designed it so the lead-weighted canopy over her cabin would collapse and crush her, and then the rest of the ship would fall apart and sink. Agrippina boarded with 2 attendants. Out on the calm, starry sea, the trap was sprung. The canopy came crashing down. One attendant was killed instantly. But the high, sturdy back of the couch Agrippina was lying on saved her. The ship itself failed to break apart as planned. In the chaos, Agrippina's other attendant, the Paranoia, made a fatal mistake. Thinking it would save her, she screamed, "I am Agrippina. Help the emperor's mother." The assassins on board heard her cries and bludgeoned her to death with their oars. Meanwhile, the real Agrippina, silent and unrecognized in the dark, slipped over the side. Despite a shoulder injury, the 43-year-old empress swam for her life. She was eventually picked up by fishing boats and brought to shore. She had survived a collapsing roof and a sinking ship. She seemed truly unkillable. When Nero got the news, he lost his nerve. He was sure his mother would now march on Rome and have him executed. He was paralyzed with fear when Seneca and Boris arrived. They saw only one way out. The show was over. The job had to be finished quickly and brutally. Nero's men arrested one of Agrippina's messengers, planted a sword on him, and claimed he was an assassin sent by her. It was the thinnest of pretexts, but it was all Nero needed. He declared his mother a traitor and dispatched Anicetus and a squad of Marines to her villa to finish the job. They found her in her bedroom, reclining on a couch. She looked up at the assassins and knew it was the end. According to Tacitus, she stared down her killer and pointed to her womb. Her famous last words were a final, bitter curse on the son she created. "Strike here," she commanded. This bore Nero. They stabbed her to death. The unkillable queen was finally gone. The historian Suetonius adds a final, grotesque detail. Nero came to view the body and calmly commented on its features. As if inspecting a statue, the son had murdered his mother. And the most sacred bond in Roman society was broken. The murder of Agrippina was a point of no return for Nero. The Senate, out of fear, officially accepted his story of her treason and suicide. But the crime of matricide horrified even the Roman elite. Suetonius claims Nero was haunted by his mother's ghost for the rest of his life. With her restraining influence gone, his reign descended into tyranny and bloodshed, culminating in his own forced suicide 9 years later, which finally extinguished the Julio-Claudian dynasty. So, how should we remember Agrippina? Is she the monster the ancient sources make her out to be, or was she something more? We have to remember who wrote her story, the historians Tacitus, Suetonius, and Cassius Dio. They were all members of the upper class that resented the emperor's power, and they operated in a deeply misogynistic world where female ambition was seen as unnatural and evil. For them, Agrippina was the ultimate cautionary tale of what happens when a woman steps out of line. They paint her actions as driven by lust and depravity, when a modern eye might see them as cold, calculated political strategies. Modern historians urge us to be cautious. The evidence for her worst crimes, especially the poisonings, is entirely circumstantial. Claudius could very well have died of natural causes. The lurid tales of the collapsing boat sound more like fiction than fact. What isn't in dispute is her incredible intelligence and ability. She survived exile, disgrace, and two unstable emperors. She didn't just survive, she thrived. She understood the ruthless game of the Roman court better than anyone, and through sheer force of will, she put her son on the throne. Perhaps the best way to see Agrippina is not as a one-dimensional villain, but as a brilliant political operator forced to be ruthless in a world that gave women no other way to hold power. She was a product of the violent, paranoid system she was born into. She was ambitious, yes. She was ruthless, absolutely. But in the context of her time, was she any more so than the men around her? Her story is a stark reminder that history is often written by those who want to control the narrative. They reduced her to a caricature of female wickedness, a queen of poisons. The truth is likely far more fascinating. She was a woman of immense talent who, for a brief shining moment, held the Roman world in her hand. But what do you think? Was Agrippina a monstrous villain? Or a brilliant survivor doing what was necessary to win in a man's world? Let me know your verdict in the comments below.